Alright, here we go. Looking at another game from round two of the FIDE World Cup taking place in Georgia, in Tbilisi. This game is between Grandmaster Viswanathan Anand with the white pieces and GM Kovalov with the black pieces. Let's get to it. E4, C5, Sicilian, knight F3, D6, D4, C takes, knight takes D4, knight F6, attacking the E pawn, knight C3, A6, Sicilian Najdorf. Anand has tons and tons of experience in this opening with the black and white pieces. Years and years of experience, so this definitely weighs in his favor. And he's played this particular line, H3, on several occasions. Okay. And H3 is cousin to lines like F3, the so-called English attack with bishop E3, etc. Except that it's a little more flexible. F3 is very committal on the king side, as of course there will be no piece using the F3 square, and H3 gives a little more flexibility that white is allowed here to still execute that typical pawn storm on the king side with G4 and G5 harassing this knight, but also use the pawn on the F file to go F4, which also keeps control of this E5 square. So it's a little more flexible, and also white, if white doesn't want to, white doesn't even have to play that aggressively. So H3 serves as a good provocative move, and it still kind of leaves black in the dark about white's intentions, and it keeps pieces off the G4 square. So it's like F3, but F3 is more, let's say, crude, more direct and straightforward. The intentions laid out, a little bit clearer for black to see. Whereas H3, you can possibly get these same kind of attacks, but it's a little more subtle because white can always just play bishop E2, for instance, bishop E3, and then castle on the king side, where he hasn't really committed himself too much. So H3 is definitely one of those modern innovations. So there it is, H3, E5, kicking the knight out of the center immediately, and black has left himself with a little weakness here on the D5 square, and black's idea is immediately to take control of that D5 square by piling up the pieces in support of this pawn advance D5. If he gets D5 in, he will liberate his game. And of course, white uses tactics and positional methods. Sometimes if he could get a pawn to C4 to stop it, he will do so. And so a great battle revolves around this square, D5, from here on out. So knight B3, the knight has been evicted, and bishop E6. So you already see the knight in conjunction with the bishop, wanting to push D5. Bishop E3. This is one of theoretical moves here. Sometimes you'll see the move F4. Right, this is more rare, but F4 is definitely possible, and has Anand's own personal stamp of approval. Okay. After f4, knight b d7, g4, rook c8, f5, bishop takes b3, a takes b3, and there's that pawn storm I was telling you about. Anand actually went on to defeat Maxim Vachier-Lagrave in the London Classic. Okay, and that was 2016. And we all know that Vachier-Lagrave is probably the #1 exponent of the Najdorf Sicilian. Okay, so this was just last year, and Anand defeated him in a very nice game in this line after the move f4. Excuse me. Another option besides the move knight b3 is knight d e2. And this move Anand used two times this year against the same opponent, in Nepomniachtchi. And after knight d2, h5, and leaving the hole right here, bishop g5, again bishop e6, takes, again fighting for this square, queen takes, knight d5, queen d8, queen d3, knight d7, and castle. Anand defeated Nepomniachtchi. This game happened to be at the Singfield Cup. The first game was at the Leuven chess tournament, but in the exact same line. So again, Anand is a great expert from in this variation, and he just recently defeated two very strong opponents in Nepomniachtchi twice, and Vachier-Lagrave. So here, Anand opts for another move. He plays knight b3, perhaps weary of opening preparation by his opponent. You know, I figured he played the other move twice, so he'll try something else. Kovalyov sticks with the plan. Again, the main focus here is d5. Bishop e3, h5. h5 is a flexible move. Of course, it doesn't have to be played. Bishop e7 is possible here, but h5 dissuades any of these kingside pawn storming moves by white. Alright, but of course, as you might have noticed in the last game I showed you with Anand and Nepo, is that the g5 square becomes available for exploiting the pin of the knight to the queen here. So it has its pros and cons. It stops the pawn storm, but weakens the king side somewhat. So h5, bishop e2. Again, now we have pressure on the pawn. Knight bd7. Castles. And this is what I was talking about earlier with the flexibility of this move. That, okay, you might have the idea of castling queenside and throwing up the pawns on the king side, or you might just opt for a peaceful game, and h3 is fine in both cases. Rook c8, queen d2 from Anand, b5, and now we see this attack against this knight over here, and also the indirect attack against the e-pawn, because the knight is protecting the pawn, of course. And this is one of the downsides, if we have one, of playing h3 as opposed to f3. If the f3 pawn, if the pawn is on f3, then there's no problem defending the e4 pawn. Whereas in this case, there's still an issue here. Rook FD1. And the idea simply, of course, is if B4, then to play in knight D5. Knight B6. Again, notice the focus on this square right here by black. That's the main, that's to give you a little rhyme, that's black's object, subject, and project. Is D5, is getting this in, liberating the position. If B4 here, again, knight D5. Alright, this is not really gonna work out too good. After queen takes B4 there. So, knight B6, and bishop takes B6 by Anand. Again, he knows he has enough experience. He's fighting for the square also. Attack against a weak pawn complex. That's the downside of black's advance on the queen side, is that just like in a Ruy Lopez, when you play A6 and B5, those pawns can turn out to be liabilities later. So B4, knight D5, knight takes D5, E takes D5, and now we have a change in the structure of the pawns, and now we have a change in planning and goals. Also, you must recognize this. What happens once this pawn comes on D5? Of course, now black's plan is totally different. He's not playing. He can't play for D5 anymore. All right, and neither can white play to attack the D6 pawn. All right, it's no longer backward on a backward file. Right, it can't be attacked anymore. It's no longer a liability. What happens in this case is play then, and you might have heard this in my other videos, but play then transfers to the majorities, the pawn majorities. Okay, black has the majority of pawns on the king side. If you count from the H file to the E file, you'll notice black has 1, 2, 3, 4 pawns to white's 3. Okay, so black has a pawn majority on the king side, and white has the 4-3 majority. Let's get rid of some colors. White has the 4-3 majority on the king side, and that becomes the strategy for both sides, is to push the majorities. All right. Of course, other tactics, there's pieces on the board, so tactics ensue. But that's the basic idea with the structures, is the pushing of these pawn majorities. A5 from Anand. This prevents black from connecting this pawn right here. So this pawn on B4 can be weak. A5. The queen drops back to B7. Queen E3 from Anand. And here, if rook takes C2, I think, excuse me, I think queen B6 is a good move, with the idea if queen takes B6, then A takes B6. And this pawn is going to cause a great deal of trouble for black. For instance, bishop E7 here. Then rook takes A6. Castle. B5. And then it's going to be one of those little bit too little too late scenarios in stopping this pawn right here. So I think that was Anand's main idea in allowing rook takes B, rook takes B2. Excuse me, rook takes C2. It's queen B6. Of course, black is not obligated to exchange queens here, and he could play a move like bishop C8. Then Anand would have to play rook D2, or else lose this pawn. Rook D2, knight takes D2. And it's still a little awkward for black here. Not really sure how he's going to deal with everything. I mean, for instance, if bishop c7, then like move like rook c1 is problematic. And if he tries to castle, you can see that queen takes b7, bishop takes b7, followed by this rook coming to the 7th rank, gives black a lost game. So black is not in trouble after taking that pawn, but you can see why Kovalev avoided it with bishop e7. He just wants to get his king, you know, his pieces a little more coordinated before trying to, you know, engage in these type of activities like snatching pawns and things like that. So it's a good practical decision. Anand offers the trade that I just showed you. Queen takes b6, a takes b6, and this is good for white, opening up the a file. We had this double attack here on this pawn. Nice passer right here. Rook b8, and now just rook takes a6. Bishop d8. You see the pile up against this right here. And nice tactics right here, exploiting the fact that the king is still hanging out, right? So if rook takes b7, then just rook d6 here. So the king goes up to e7. And now here's where the tables turn. Somewhere Anand miscalculated. I think Anand was on his way to victory after, for example, rook da1, just taking over this important a file. And let's say g6, just so the rook is not forced to protect his pawn any longer. And just rook a8. Rook takes b7. Now bishop b6. Rook d8. And I just think that black's passivity eventually will be the death of him. I like white's position here. Again, black is not lost here, but he's just in trouble with his pieces just kind of tied up like this. All right. And I think white also has a good chance of creating a passed pawn eventually with his majority over here on the queen side before black can really do anything with his. Here, Anand saw a nice idea to net a couple of pawns, but the problem is the pawns are kind of scattered, and so he doesn't have the coordination necessary to force black to capitulate here. He plays this move, knight c5, which the whole world knows by now. Of course, you know, didn't know during the game probably that this is a miscalculation. So he plays this move, knight c5, d takes c5, d6 check. Kovalyov scurries out to f6. Bishop f3. So we see, you know, the pawn is protected. The king is over here. Black's pieces are still bizarrely coordinated. King f8. Excuse me, king f5. Bishop d5. e4, netting another pawn with check, netting another pawn, and again, so white has these pawns, but they're all scattered about. There's no real push. Now, if this pawn was, say, here, it'd be totally different. However, there's no real way to convert this. and black just makes a few excuse me, a few moves to consolidate his position. Make sure there will be no queening taking place. And he just stops all of Anand's counterplay. Starts trading off pieces, even at the cost of his own pawn structure. And then he finally wins that B pawn, which caused so much trouble. And after rook e3 check, it's probably a spite check. You know, he probably was mad, and you know that's kind of like a chess player's way of cursing without saying it. Is making that, you know, that spite check at the end, just, you know, like giving, you know, somebody the bird or whatever, throw that last check in there. And you know, Anand will be back tomorrow, though. That's his way of saying that, like, all right, you know, like Arnold Schwarzenegger in the Terminator, you know, like, I'll be back. You know, that was that check right there. So anyway, good game by Kovalev, and just hanging on. You know, I can't say that he was really better and stuff. Matter of fact, Anand was put the pressure on, used his experience, and was pretty close to, you know, gaining a decisive advantage. But the thing is Kovalov had that bend but don't break position, whereas you knew White was better, but it was like Anand couldn't find a clear path to being better, and that's why he wound up making that error right there. So good game by Kovalev, you know, representing the Najdorf. And again, Anand had all experience in the world. I showed you that he, you know, beat Nepo twice, Vasyl Lagrov. You know, this all in the last 2 years. This wasn't like he did it 10 years ago. So it shows that he, you know, in this same line. So he knows the stuff. And again, he built up a nice position, but just you know, blew it with that now famous dubious sacrifice. So that'll do it for now. Please, you know, like and subscribe. And this channel, you know, is helpful to you. Please drop a little donation. You know, it doesn't matter how much it is. It will be very well appreciated. I thank you all very much for listening. I'll see you on the next video.